Hi everyone, welcome. We shall start in a minute once all participants have joined, yeah? All right, so I believe everyone is well settled. Maybe we can start now. Okay, so a very good morning to all of you. Welcome to our very first Global Talent Visa webinar. We are excited to see so many of you joining us today. Allow me to introduce myself. So my name is Audrey. All right, let me just get to the next slide. All right. My name is Audrey and I'm the Associate Director of Global Migration Solutions. I have been in the industry for 11 years and has been focusing on skill migration and family migration, and now the GTI as well. It is of no surprise that we have so many people joining us today, as the Global Talent Visa, or GTI, is one of the most popular programs right now, as it offers a direct permanent residency in Australia. This program has also been given high priority by the Australian government, in line with the objective of attracting highly talented individuals into Australia. How it works or what it takes will be covered in this webinar, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the session and welcome any questions. Before we start, I would just like to quickly run through our company and the speakers for today. Okay. Global Migration Solutions, we are a licensed migration advisor, and we're known to be a company that offers premier migration services. Our affiliate ANZ Migrate shares the same credential and based in Singapore. It's a bit slow with the slides, just bear with me. Okay. We've been around for 16 years with a reputable success rate of 99%, and we've helped more than 12,000 families migrate to Australia. Our presence is across Asia Pacific, with 5 offices in KL, Singapore, Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Australia. We have received multiple awards with U Global Immigration Magazine consecutively. These are the range of services that we offer. Okay, this is, apologize, I think there's a slight delay in going to the next slide. Okay, here it comes. So basically, these are the range of services we offer. We are pioneers in Australia and New Zealand migration. In the recent years, we have also diversified to offer migration services by investment for Portugal, US, and Canada. Desmond Ang is the Managing Director and Founder of Global Migration Solutions. He is a licensed migration advisor for Australia and New Zealand. Desmond has extensive experience in handling various migration programs in 16 years of experience. Next would be, I would like to introduce the speaker for today. Slide is so slow, sorry. All right, so the next is James Allen Hall. James, do you mind switching on your video?
It is.
Okay. Hi. Okay. So I'm pleased to bring you our speaker for today, James Allen Hall. James is our Senior Licensed Migration Advisor, and he's also the Certified Professional Development Trainer for migration agents. His company was also awarded the top 25 immigration company by U Global. So I must say today's session is a valuable one, as you'll be hearing from the GTI expert himself. All right. James is very well versed in GTI, as he has conducted training workshop for the GTI visa for other migration agents as part of their CPD. So we trust this session will be beneficial for you, and you're most welcome to ask any questions that you'd like to clarify about this program. Just to assure you, you're in safe hands as well. These are our licenses, okay? Sharing that this is the migration license for Australia and New Zealand for both James and Desmond. So I shall now pass on to James, and I wish you all a fruitful session. James, on to you, please.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and good morning, everyone. So my name's James, as Audrey mentioned, and I'm a registered migration agent for Australia. I've been doing the Distinguished Talent Visa, which is the predecessor of the Global Talent, for about 7-8 years now. The specific Global Talent, which rides on the existing Distinguished Talent Visa, was introduced in 2018, so it is relatively new. But the predecessor, the Distinguished Talent, has been around for a little bit longer than that. The idea of this is to address some of the challenges the government's having, because they've been using a program called skilled migration for many, many years, and it's become more and more difficult managing that and getting the right results out of the program. And the thing is that skilled migration doesn't recognize an individual's exceptional talents and achievements. It's a very generic, across the board approach where you just get points for having a qualification, or points for having work experience, or points for having English, rather than recognizing anyone being exceptional in any of these categories. It doesn't even do that. So the government was looking for a system, and this is still a trial, but it's working quite well, that would allow them to identify people with very high level of skills or have done exceptional achievements, and give them express pathways to actually get residency in Australia. So that's what we're going to be looking at today with the Global Talent Visa. Now, as Audrey mentioned, we do have licensing and registration, so I'll just move along with that. The previous screen was, and I'll go back to it, is our Australian licensing, and this is our New Zealand licensing. So we do multiple countries. As you saw, in addition to Australia and New Zealand, there are other countries as well, but both Desmond and I hold government licensing for practicing immigration advice or consulting specifically for Australia and New Zealand, and this is our New Zealand license. Various awards, as Audrey read through, and we've both got top 25 awards globally in recognition of our migration services. Okay, so let's get back onto the actual visa itself and the visa pathway. As I mentioned, the Global Talent Visa derives from the Distinguished Talent Visa. The difference is the Distinguished Talent Visa was originally designed to bring the top tier people to Australia. So, for example, if you were in a national sporting team or an Olympic athlete, or you were really at the top tier of your field, then you could be a candidate for the Distinguished Talent Visa. So this could be a famous actress, it could be a famous singer, a famous sports player, a famous scientist. But the key thing here is normally you'd be famous in your field with international recognition. Now, the Global Talent Visa is designed to be different to that. It does use the same underlying visa mechanism, but it streamlines a lot of it, and you don't have to be at the top tier necessarily for your field anymore. What we're looking for are candidates that stand out. So you don't have to stand out so that you are the #1 person in your field, but we are expecting you to stand out against your peers and against other typical people in your field. We want to see that you are above the average for your field. That's what we're talking about here as the candidate for this. And the idea of this program is to attract people in specific sectors, and these are sectors that the Australian government has identified are in demand in Australia, and they're hoping to bring highly skilled people in that will help develop these particular sectors in Australia. and help Australia grow, because these are identified as growth sectors that will help the Australian economy and help the Australian people to grow and develop. Now, the program, the first trial of this was 5,000 places per year. We're very fortunate in that when the budget came out last year, the Australian government budget sets the planning levels for the program year. Normally this is done in May, and the program year follows the financial year in Australia, which starts from July and runs through to June of the following year. Last year, because of the COVID-19 impact, the budget was delayed. So instead of coming out in May, it came out in October. So we didn't get the revisions to the program until October. And many of the programs were decreased. So things like skilled migration, there were massive cuts to the numbers to reduce the number of places available. But fortunately, for the Global Talent Program, they increased the number of places. And in fact, they tripled the number of places. So instead of 5,000 places, we now have 15,000 places, which is a huge number. Despite that, it looks like the program will be fully subscribed in this program year, because there are a lot of applicants coming in via this, surprisingly. So that's great news for Australia. It's not so great for candidates, because it means that there's a high likelihood in the near future that future applicants may have to meet a higher set of requirements. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But that is also in line with the general golden rule of immigration, which is things get harder, apply while you're eligible. That's the #1 golden rule for immigration, because over time, competition increases, more and more people have higher qualifications, and generally places available don't increase that much. Okay, so some of the key features of the GTI that make it a very attractive program. There's no age limit. There are some additional requirements if someone is under 18 or someone is 55 years and above. There are some additional requirements, and they have to show additional exceptional benefit that they can bring to Australia. But aside from that, there is no hard age limit. In addition, if you are under 18, there's a special provision under this that allows your parents to migrate with you. So if you've got a child in, let's say, high school that is showing themselves as exceptional in a particular field already, or maybe early university before they turned 18, they can actually do this and include their parents to get permanent residency with them. Normally, that's not the case. So it's a special exception for 18-year-olds, or under 18-year-olds, I should say. There is no English requirement for this pathway. Now, I'd be cautious saying this. So in terms of the actual visa requirements themselves, there is no English requirement. But when it comes to fees and the government fees, they do charge a higher fee if any adult applicants, so the main applicant, their spouse, or any children that are 18 years or older, if they don't have basic English, and the level technically is called functional English. And functional English can be demonstrated through education that was conducted in English, such as primary or secondary school, diploma, certificate, degrees, and so on. You can show these have been conducted in English. There's no test required. If you don't have these, but you speak English, you can do a basic English test. The reason for that is to avoid a higher visa fee. So you can go through with no English, and you don't have to do a test if you don't want. But if you don't have evidence of basic English, then there will be a higher visa fee applicable to the visa processing. No mandatory qualifications for this, and we've got people through that have no qualifications, so that's important to note. There is some consideration for qualifications, but that's more in showing how exceptional you are. So you don't have to have that if you can show that you're exceptional in your achievements, and what you've done has been done through your career, regardless of qualifications. That's fine. It's a direct permanent residence visa. And that's more and more important these days to talk about, because the government has a long-term strategy of removing direct permanent residence pathways. And you'll see this in other visas. For example, with skilled migration, which still has some options for direct permanent residency, they're trying to move it towards a two-stage process where it's a temporary visa first, or provisional visa. You go down to Australia, live and work there, and then later you get your permanent residency. Regional employment has also been changed. Previously, you could go straight through to permanent residency. That's also been changed to be a temporary visa first, You need to go down there and prove yourself first before you get your permanent residency. But for now, this pathway has direct permanent residence. And this is something that is becoming rare in immigration. Even the top business visa process for Australia does currently allow people to apply for permanent residency directly, and that's called a 132A. But that is also going. In fact, the last options for that will be disappearing within the next few weeks. So there'll be no more of that. And again, we'll revert to a temporary visa first, permanent residence later. Now, there's no indication that's going to happen to the GTI, but I'm just talking here about the general trend and how rare it is to have a pathway that is directly to permanent residence. And going to permanent residence means that you don't have any mandated obligations in Australia. Okay, there are requirements you'd need to meet if you want to keep your PR renewed beyond a certain amount of time, but there's no mandatory minimum amount of time you do need to spend in Australia. And it does get priority processing by the Australian government. So this is a high focus visa by the government. And the visa processing time, when you've got the global talent approval, can be in the order of 3-4 months, that sort of time frame. So quite fast. Okay, so let's look at some of the key criteria to get the global talent visa. Now, I'll go through the key ones. There's, of course, lots of requirements, but these are going to be the major ones we need to think about. So the first one is to have an internationally recognized record of exceptional and outstanding achievement. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that there has to be international recognition of the achievement. Now, it doesn't mean that what you've done has to have been done internationally, but it does mean that the achievement itself, what you've done, what you've achieved, should be something that would get international recognition or would get recognized in other countries. So I'll give you an example. If you were playing, I'm trying to think of something that might be specific to one country. So you're playing maybe a local ethnic sport, maybe futsal, where they kick the bags on their feet. That probably would not have any real recognition in Australia, but it might have recognition in some other international countries. So we're trying to look for things that would have wider recognition, international recognition. Of course, things like maths, science, ICT, these dominant industries, dominant sectors are not going to be an issue for this. So the key point here is that your skills and your achievements should be at a level that would be recognized in other countries, even if they haven't been. So that capability has to be there. And in terms of when we talk about exceptional and outstanding achievement, you look at the bottom line here and you'll see we don't actually have a prescribed definition for this, but we go with the standard English dictionary definition, which basically says that for extraordinary, it must place the individual above the average. So we don't need you to be the most amazing person in your field, but we want you to have done something significant, something that is notable, and something that puts you above other people in your field. You are required to still be prominent in your area. Now, what does that mean? Well, prominence means recognition, that you're notable, that you're known of. The general expectation would be that if you're practicing, let's say in Malaysia, and I went to someone in your field in Malaysia and say, hey, do you know about this person? We would expect normally they would know of that person because they are prominent in that field. It doesn't mean that someone outside of that field knows of you, but we would expect, especially if it's a very specialized field, and we went to someone in that same specialized field and said, do you know of this person? Do you know of their work? We would expect the answer to be a yes. So still being prominent means that that prominence is there currently. So this would apply, for example, to someone, let's say 10 years ago, they invented something and it was quite significant, notable or usable. Maybe it was used in some hospitals and resulted in some lives being saved or some cost reductions, or maybe a government decided to use that technology to some benefit. Then there was recognition back then, let's say 10 years ago. And in the meantime, we don't require them to have done the same thing, but we want to show that they have still got prominence in that area. Maybe a better example would be, for prominence would be a sports person. So someone that was at the national level 10 years ago and won in international competitions. And now they're not playing at that level, but they're still in that sport, and maybe they're doing coaching. So they're coaching younger people to get into that sport. We would still consider that to be prominence in the area because they're still making a contribution to that area. They're still involved in that same area, even though they may not be at that same level of achievement. That this is acceptable. There has to be the potential to be the asset, or to be an asset to the Australian community. And this one's fairly obvious. I mean, this is the reason why the Australian government is doing this program. They want to bring skills and knowledge to Australia that can benefit Australia. So the skills and knowledge you bring to Australia, the capability you bring to Australia, should be seen to be something that can be of an asset to the Australian community. And this can be measured in different ways, and it shouldn't just be thought of as economic. Okay, a lot of people just think, well, how many dollars is this going to bring in? And there can be financial benefits. But strengthening relations between Australia and another country, improving Australia's research pool of knowledge, any other benefits that can be demonstrated or described that are likely to occur in Australia would address this requirement. So no difficulty in obtaining employment or establishing yourself independently in Australia. So again, this refers to what is assessed about that person now and the potential capability in Australia. So we want to see that it's likely they'll be able to find work in Australia or start their own business successfully in Australia and establish themselves. Now, when we assess this, it doesn't matter about your money that you have already. You could be very rich. That's not taken into account for this. So if Bill Gates, for example, or Elon Musk said, you know, I want to apply for the Global Talent Visa, and they potentially could, the fact that he's got lots of money already is not a factor for establishing themselves independently in Australia. What would be their knowledge, their employability, these kinds of factors, or their success and history of just doing their own startup businesses. That can also be considered as part of this. But just saying, well, I've got lots of money, that doesn't automatically meet this requirement. If the person is under 18 or 55 years plus, they have to be able to show that they're going to be bring exceptional benefit to the Australian community. So this is beyond what we've talked about already. And we would expect them to be able to elevate the international standing of a particular area of Australia. So we would expect something significant to come from their presence in Australia and for them to have a widespread effect on that particular industry or sector in Australia in a way that would get international recognition or be recognized as being increased in standing internationally. So that's an important one to do. And this is not that difficult. I'm familiar with a case that was done a few years ago. It wasn't the global talent, but it was the underlying distinguished talent, which was for a ballet dancer. It was a young ballet dancer, ballerina. And it was not difficult for her to show this, just because she was so accomplished. She had a lot of potential ahead of her. And it was felt that by having her in Australia, she would not only be someone that would be representing Australia, but would be someone that later would be coaching and leading other Australians and having a widespread impact, a positive impact on that area in Australia. The other important thing with the Global Talent Visa is nomination. So all applications for the Global Talent Visa must be supported with a nomination. And a nomination is where an Australian or eligible New Zealand, so certain New Zealand people can do this as well, so Australian, eligible New Zealand person, or an Australian organisation, so either an individual or an Australian organisation agrees that this person, and agrees to sign a statement that this person is a notable person in their field, and they do have a high record of achievement in their field. And that person that's signing this off, that nominator, they themselves must have a national reputation in Australia in that field. So this one is not by the applicant, it's someone external to the applicant. It doesn't have to be someone that knows the applicant personally, but it is something that must be done, and it's very important. It's also one of the more challenging parts of the process for many people. So to give you some more information about this, I've just recently helped a person that was involved in the medtech field, that was involved in doing COVID-19 drug trials. And we got her first stage approval. I'll talk about the process in a moment, within a couple of months. And we're now putting together her visa application for the global talent visa, and we're finalizing her nomination. And her nomination, we contacted a major pharmaceutical company in Australia, and that company agreed for one of their representatives to sign the nomination form on behalf of this person, indicating that they believed she would be a significant asset to Australia and that she does have a high record of achievement in her field. Other nominators we've dealt with have been professional associations for specific sectors and fields. We've dealt with academic research sections of universities. We've also dealt with government bodies as well. So this is something that will work with you to assist, to identify. Some clients, just because of the international aspect of their experience, will already know people in their field in Australia, and they may be suitable as a nominator. We can certainly advise on that if that person does have a national reputation in Australia in that specific field. And the other key criteria, there's a few other, two bits of other criteria, in fact, that I want to talk about just to make you aware. The first thing is that when we talk about the record of achievement, in most cases, we are looking at someone that's got an extensive career and made or done certain achievements in that career. But we can also look at people that are just starting out. And we can take PhD graduates, so the recent PhD graduates, and that's where they graduated within the last 3 years, or they're at the end of their PhD research and they're planning to submit their thesis within the next 6 months. We can take people on this basis, even though they haven't yet got an established career beyond that, and use them as applicants for this. Now, there are a few caveats here. We do want to see that there has been some international recognition for the research work they've done, and we've got to see that the research work has some potential for benefit for Australia. Then in that case, they can be a candidate for this program. There also needs to be the capability of earning a high salary threshold in Australia, which is currently $153,600 annually. It doesn't mean the person's earning that now, but we need to show the capability is there to earn that in the future in Australia. And that can be through employment in Australia. It could be through starting their own business in Australia. But we do have to be able to justify how that can be attained in the future in Australia. Now, for many occupations, we can easily show that, especially for senior occupations, by showing similar jobs in Australia, advertised jobs in Australia, where the salary is at that level or above that level. So, for example, if we're dealing with lecturers, if someone's at the associate professor level or higher, then they would be able to show they can get this salary in Australia just by the published salary for some of the major universities. Many IT roles, we can show that the industry salaries in Australia are actually above this for many ICT roles. So that is there, and we can assist with that. You can also, if you know people in Australia that are in similar roles, you could get evidence of their salary to show that you've got someone you know in a similar role in Australia, and this is a salary they're getting in Australia for that similar role. That can also be used as well. So there's a few different ways to do this. Of course, if you're already getting this salary now, then we can show that as well. Now, the target sectors the government's looking at for this. Now, up till January, we had 7 sectors. You can see those on the left. But from January, they have been increased to 10 sectors. And I should point out the government also takes a very liberal view of these. They really don't want to define these too tightly. And it's possible to get people through that aren't necessarily directly under these. So for example, I mentioned that I had someone recently that went under the med pathway and doing COVID-19 trials. And we did it under the previous structure, which was MedTech. Strictly speaking, she's not MedTech. She's involved in regulatory affairs and coordinating drug trials. It's not MedTech specific, but the category is broad enough that she can be included in that. So don't rule yourself out. If you think there's even a slight association with some of these sectors, let us know. We do talk with the global talent team quite regularly, and we do run CVs by them to see whether or not that's still considered someone who might not be a standard candidate for one of these sectors. So there still can be opportunities there. So the new sectors are here, and I'll run through those in the coming slides. So circular economy is a big one. That's been added in now, and that will look at all different things around recycling, renewable, reuse of materials. Again, very, very broad. So there are other areas that could still be used that relate to the circular economy. So if you can justify how what you're doing is related in some way to the circular economy, then that could potentially be used. And it could be, for example, that you're doing production, but you're doing a new style of production where offcuts from the production get reused back into the production cycle. So there are a lot of things that could be done around this that could be used. Education, very, very broad, and this has just been added in from January. And Australia sees education as something that's very important for the future. I'm sure most countries do. And we do mention EduTech here. It doesn't have to be, but that's one of the more exciting areas in the education space. So things for online delivery, for improving education, new tools to assist with education, new practices, and so on, to enhance and develop learning in education. Agri-food and AgTech. So this looks at the whole agricultural industry, but it's not just the farming itself. We're looking at everything. So we're looking at what's used on the farm. So it could be using drones to go and map the farm. It could be using technology to keep track of the cattle. I mean, I've got clients that are doing farming in New South Wales now, and they've got no farming experience, but they actually have a computer screen, and the computer tells them where each animal is, what it's doing, and they keep track of the farm that way, almost like a computer game. So it's really high-tech farming. But it's right through from that farm, right through to your table, the food on your table. So it involves supermarkets, it's supply chain, transportation, chilling of the food, preservatives that might be used with the food, processing, restaurants, anything right through that whole process that stems from agricultural and food in general. So things like doing impossible burgers where you're making artificial meats from plant protein. There's a lot of technology these days around mushrooms and fungi and making new materials and foods out of them. So anything in this space could potentially apply to the agri-food and AgTech. Infrastructure and tourism. This again is a very, very broad category. So first of all, it derives from the tourism sector. Tourism has always been a big industry for Australia. Australia is a very favoured destination for tourists globally. And Australia wants to look at how it can lift its game in the tourism space. And that's where infrastructure comes into this. And the infrastructure ostensibly relates to the infrastructure that would be relevant to tourist activities. So we're talking about basic things, first of all, like transport, communications facilities, the terminals, the airports and ferry terminals, boat terminals. But beyond that as well, all the interconnecting infrastructure. So this infrastructure is not just infrastructure that may be transport or tourism specific, but overlaps into that. So it's a very, very broad category. Resources. And the traditional famous resources from Australia would be in the mining: iron ore, aluminium, uranium. That's obviously a sensitive export, but Australia does export a lot of uranium. But there are other resources, and this could overlap with other categories as well. So for example, if Australia starts exporting hydrogen gas or hydrogen as an energy source, that's a possibility. They've talked about having facilities in the northern part of Australia to extract hydrogen gas from seawater and then export that as a fuel. That's a resource. But mining is probably the main one here, looking at aspects of the resources, things that improve the efficiency of managing the resources. But it could also include new resources that haven't even been identified yet that might be able to be used or tapped into. Energy, which is quite related to the resources previously. So all forms of energy, again, coming from traditionally mined resources like oil and gas and coal and uranium. An interesting position at the moment is quite somewhat awkwardly, the Australian government is still very pro-mining. And I would say a large portion of the Australian population are not supportive of that. And certainly a growing part of the world is no longer supportive of burning things like coal. Australia still is supportive of that, mainly because they derive such significant financial benefits from selling coal to the rest of the world. Australia's coal is high grade, it is very efficient, but although there are questions over that, it's still a dominant industry in Australia. So they are looking at new technologies that can reduce or wastage or pollution from these that can make mining more efficient. But in addition to those old school and older resources, we are looking at things like, as I mentioned before, hydrogen, ways to reduce carbon emissions, renewables, hybrid technologies, so wind farms, solar cells, they would come into this as well. AI systems that might help manage these and provide better solutions. So a whole range there. It's really not limited to any particular category, but very, very broad energy. Financial services and FinTech. So obviously FinTech, blockchain is a very, very big thing, but they're looking beyond that. So it could be technologies that help in processing, technologies related to regulation of the industry, processes related to this. So things that can be done within the financial services, FinTech, could be microloans. So again, very, very broad. If you can show that your achievements are aligned somewhat with one of these sectors, then it's likely to be sufficient. But of course, talk to us about that. Health is very, very broad. So some of the examples are listed there. New technologies, implants, biochemistry, developing new medications, wide range that can be considered there. The government is very interested, of course, like everyone, in anything too that can assist with the COVID-19 response. So that gets the highest priority in terms of processing if you've got involvement in something that does assist with the response to COVID-19. DigiTech. So in the previous sectors, we had this broken up into different sectors. We had machine learning, we had quantum computing, we had data science. We had these things as separate sectors. They now have combined it all into DigiTech. So so digital technology. So very, very broad. So if you're doing a special drone technology, would come under this. Doing anything to do with computers or IT or data science would come under this as well. Cybersecurity would come under this as well. So very, very broad category relating to electronics, to computing, to data science, information science, all would be relevant to this. Defense, advanced manufacturing, and space. Now, the reason why advanced manufacturing has been lumped with defense and space is that the government sees that these things tend to use the similar or same cutting edge, leading edge technologies. So advanced manufacturing, we're talking about things like robotics, automation, AI, visual AI systems to recognize what they're doing. So there's a lot of technology here, and they believe a lot of the same technology, same knowledge would be applicable across defense and space as well. But again, very, very broad. If you've got anything that may be able to interface in this, or maybe even if it's not built for this specific sector, but could be adapted to this sector, then it could have relevance to this. And for the GTI, we only have to show relevance to one sector, not multiple sectors. In fact, we have to narrow it down to one sector, even if you do cross multiple sectors. But there's no harm in crossing multiple. It's just that we do have to officially put you under one sector only. Okay, so let's talk about the actual GTI process itself. So I've talked about the general requirements and what we're looking for. Let's talk about the actual process we go through for this. So the first stage is the commencement. And with the commencement's where we will talk to you, find out more information about your background, your qualifications, what work experience you've done, any awards you might have got, the recognition, and evaluate whether or not you are going to be suitable as a candidate for this process. Provided you are, then we'll kickstart the process. We'll be able to give you a quotation upfront for the fees for the process. You don't have to sign anything until you get that quotation. And then once you're okay with that, we'll then be able to start the visa process. The first stage of that is preparing what's called an expression of interest, or an EOI. This is not yet a visa application, but this is a submission that is made, and it's a very detailed submission that will summarize your experience, your achievements, your credentials, your potential benefit for Australia, your earning potential in Australia, and so on. And we'll need to present this to the global talent team for their review. And that's done through the expression of interest process. So it's a submission to them that they will then look at and consider. Now, processing time for the expression of interest does vary considerably. I was talking to the team a few weeks ago, and they were telling me that they're still processing expressions of interest from July last year. So as time goes on, I expect that to get close to a year in terms of processing for the EOI. Now, the bad thing is that obviously means a wait. The good thing means you're still in the queue. It's a longer wait. So you're not dropped out because of the longer processing time. There is no time limit for this, but it's just going to take longer processing. That said, we've put candidates in even as early as December, where they've been processed in a month because they were deemed to be high areas of interest. In particular, they were seen to be either relevant to the COVID-19 response or the COVID-19 recovery. So the recovery doesn't mean it has to be medical or related to COVID-19, but something that is going to be significant for economic recovery for Australia, in particular, high earning DigiTech roles, for example. So if you're currently earning the high salary and you're in strong tech roles, then you've got a good chance of being considered as part of that COVID-19 recovery and getting your EOI processed faster. When we submit the visa application, which is point 4, we must submit with it in parallel a nomination. So although we've got the nomination here at 3, it's not actually submitted separately. It is submitted with the visa application at point 4. And the nomination, as I said before, is where someone from Australia says and agrees on a bit of paper saying, we think this applicant is exceptional, they've got a high record of achievement in their field, and they would be of value to Australia. And it doesn't have to be someone we know, but it has to be someone from that industry with reputation in that industry in Australia. Now, they might not have that reputation directly themselves, So for example, you might get a senior lecturer in that field in Australia to do it, but they themselves may not be famous in that field, but they come from a leading university in Australia and they tap onto the reputation of the university they work for. But similarly with industry organizations or companies in Australia, the person may be a part of in a senior role in a large company in that field in Australia, and they can still sign this nomination in personal capacity by virtue of their position being a high position in a company that has a national reputation in Australia. So they get submitted with the visa application, which is where we submit all the information. With the visa application, you will need to do medical checks, police checks. One interesting point to note, that with medical checks for visas for Australia, for most visas for Australia, in fact, other business, investment, skill visas for Australia, you do need to meet a set of a certain minimum standard of health. Now, that is generally measured as not likely to incur substantial costs in Australia. And it's fairly lenient. I mean, someone who has a minor condition, we've had people with hepatitis B, we've had people with asthma, people who've got diabetes and have got through this successfully. So it's not so much the condition, but the severity of the condition and the expected medical costs in the future associated with that, whether or not they're going to be something substantial or not. But what I wanted to mention was, with this particular visa, there is an option to waive the medical criteria if the person does obviously have some medical concern that wouldn't normally meet it, but the expected benefits they'll bring to Australia outweigh the expected costs associated with the medical condition. There is an option for a waiver for this, and that's quite unusual. Other business skilled investor type visas don't have that option. And as we said before, the next step after this is the approval for a permanent residence visa. This is directly to permanent residence. If you are getting the global talent pathway for this, then you're probably looking around 3-4 months for the processing of the visa to get the permanent residency in Australia. See the timeline here. This is a very, I guess, exaggerated in terms of we've extended the time frame. So we're not, this is not a best case scenario. This is a very, very open, wide sort of timing, just so we want people to have a realistic expectation, but very likely these can be done faster. For example, here we've got someone starting in April, we're doing the review in April, then signing up in May, and then submitting the EOI in June. Normally to get an EOI submission, it depends upon the client. We'll be looking to do that within 2 weeks. So that would be, as long as we get the information documentation from the client to do that, we can get that done very fast. Nomination will be prepared. That will depend upon the nominator. Usually that will take about 2 or 3 weeks. And then we can submit the visa application. Now, the processing time here with the nomination, you'll see August to March next year. This is what we're referring to before, that if you are deemed to be relevant to the COVID-19 response or recovery, you'll get the priority processing. And that would be a month or 2. If not, you'll be looking at a longer processing time that could be stretching up to a year even. So it will be longer. Okay. So go back a step. So upcoming changes in the next program year. Skilled migration, which is, and the reason why I mentioned skilled migration a few times is skilled migration has been the mainstay of the offshore program for many, many years. It's still continuing, but the numbers are greatly reduced. So it's something that is more competitive and more difficult to achieve and getting through successfully. And one of the reasons for that is the quota from the number of places available under that program has been moved out to other programs, such as the Global Talent. And so basically the government is saying they're favoring people under the Global Talent visa versus programs like skilled migration, because they're taking the places away from those programs and putting them into the Global Talent and other visa programs. So that's why skilled migration is becoming more and more difficult. And for many people, it may not be a viable option anymore. There is a high demand for the Global Talent Visa. It's actually been widely popular. So we had the additional 15,000 places issued in October. And then because of the number of people coming through, they made some changes. And by January, there was a major change, which was you could make the application based upon your academic study, as I mentioned before, with PhDs. But actually up till January, you could do it based upon even a degree with honours or a master's degree. You can actually do it based upon that study if you did some research activity or projects that indicated a high record of achievement, then it was possible to do it based upon those. But as of January, only PhD now can be considered if you're doing it based upon qualifications alone. Of course, you can still do this without a PhD, but you've got to do it based upon your career rather than your study if you're doing that. So it's based upon study alone and research activity and study alone, then it now has to be a PhD. Now that's the change that occurred in January. We are expecting changes later because the program is starting to become oversubscribed. So there are more and more people applying for this. The queue is building up. And that's one of the reasons why for the EOI processing time, they've now segmented it and giving priority processing under the EOI for those that are deemed relevant to the COVID-19 response or recovery. Come July, we will see a increase in processing charges, visa charges from July as well. They have not yet been announced, but there will be likely a small increase in visa charges from the 1st of July. Okay, so that's brought us to the end of the presentation. I believe, time permitting, we'll be doing some questions and Audrey will rejoin us. So our contact details are up there. You're more than welcome to contact us, and you should contact us, even if you think maybe, well, I'm not quite sure, or maybe I don't quite meet this requirement, or you know, I'm interested, but you know, maybe this one I'm not sure about. Still contact us. Let us have a chat. There are other pathways we can also consider, or the program may be flexible enough to allow you to go through. For example, I talked about agri-food, but I'm actually got a client going through who works with rainforest ecology. Now, it's not food, it's not agriculture, but it's considered to be close enough to be able to fit within these categories. So there is a fair bit of flexibility there. These categories are not meant to be cast in stone, and even the Global Talent team have told us themselves that it shouldn't be treated that way. They're just more of a starting point for this. So something completely different to these probably wouldn't get through, but as long as there's some relationship to them, then there's a possibility you can get through. And if we weren't sure, we'll go and talk to one of our team contacts, global team, and discuss it, come back to you. We can give you a better bit of feedback on whether or not you're likely to get through this process. This is something that we have, well, I think we in terms of the industry, are taking a strong leadership role in promoting this. Myself, I actually teach other migration agents in this sphere. So I run training classes, continuing professional development classes for other migration agents, and have been teaching other agents about this visa, this pathway, and educating them on this. And I've been doing that for the last few months. So it's something that we are quite experienced in. It's something that we are available to help you with. And if you have questions, please contact us and we'll be more than glad to assist. Audrey.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Fantastic session. Thank you very much. I believe there was so much of information being shared that was just, I'm sure everyone would agree with me that this is not information that you can find online or anywhere. This is solely from the expert. Thanks again, James, for everything. So I'm going to, before I go through the questions, we have a lot of questions, everyone. So I will be picking the questions, unfortunately, because of time, I'll be picking the questions that would be able to benefit the audience at large, all right? And if you would like us to review your eligibility, just a kind reminder, kindly send us your CV to the email address on the screen, okay? So let's begin with the questions, James. Okay. We
Oh,
start.
wow. Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat window.
You can
Okay.
see
Yeah.
the list of questions, right? So I'm going to pick the ones that are going to
Okay.
be benefiting more people. All right.
Sure.
So I think this is important to know. When does the next budget get announced, and how many of the 15,000 places have been filled, James?
Yeah. Look, we don't know when the new budget will be out. Normally it comes out in May, and that's in preparation for the program year starting on the 1st of July. That was thrown up in the air last year because of the COVID-19 situation. So hopefully this year it'll be back to normal, and the budget will be in May or soon after May, ready for the financial year in July. What numbers will be in the program, we don't know. This is still very much a test, a pilot. Although it's in production, it's still very much a pilot to see how things go. And basically it's the second year, and they've put it up from 5,000 to 15,000. Who knows, they might increase it further if they believe it's going to also depend upon the outcome and look at the outcome of this. So I don't know yet, but I'm hopeful that it will remain, or some form of it will remain and continue.
Okay, all right, thank you. The next question is, in the current pandemic situation, how is the chance for an offshore applicant like us when there is a backlog?
Oh, the backlog. Okay, so first of all, there is a backlog in terms of the high number of people putting the expressions of interest in. So the first thing that's happening is the government is prioritising, as I said, within the EOI backlog, they're prioritising EOIs where they're considering a couple of factors, and it's not published, it's not official, but they'll look at, are they currently earning a high income now? That's a factor. So it's not a must to earn that high income now, but for the priority of the EOI, earning that high income of 153,000 Australian dollar equivalent now, or doing something that is in the COVID-19 response space. So involved in COVID-19 testing, drug development, response support, or COVID-19 recovery. What I mean by the recovery, it's not the actual recovery from the COVID-19 disease, but it's the economic recovery of Australia from the impact of the COVID-19. So if you're deemed to be within those, then you'll get priority processing. They may also give priority processing on a one-on-one discretionary basis to other people as well. So it's not a hard-coded, this is how it will be, but these are the main considerations that we're aware of for this. Now, let's say that you don't get that priority processing and you have to wait, and let's say, well, at the moment it's about a 10-month wait for the EOI. So let's say, and so over time that will increase as more people apply. So let's say if you're doing it now, maybe it's going to be a 12-month wait. That's not a problem for you. It just means that you've got a longer wait before you can apply for the GTI. But once you've applied for the GTI visa and you've got your nominator, then the rest is all normal at this stage. Now, processing times can change. It might get faster, might get slower. So we can't make any promises around that. But the point is you're on the pathway then to get the permanent residency. You're not penalised by the fact it takes longer. I guess that's the important point to get across. You're in the queue.
Thank you, James. And correct me if I'm wrong, it is also important to clarify that being an offshore applicant doesn't hinder the entire selection, correct?
No, there's no separate selection for onshore, offshore.
There's no separation, yeah? So don't stop from trying.
Well, it's not trying. You either meet the requirements and we do it, or you don't meet the requirements and we don't do it. I mean, there could be a small group where we say, well, you're close and we're not sure, but you want to try out the EOI, we can. I mean, the EOI is not, is very low cost to prepare and get the EOI done. So if someone we thought, well, maybe borderline, might say, well, give it a shot. As you know, Audrey, there's some clients of ours that are doing other visas, and we've said, well, you might have a chance with the GTI. Even though you're not the normal type of candidate that would be strong in it, but let's put an EOI in just to see how alongside your other visa application. And we've done that for a couple of people already.
Great. There's a specific question here, James, whether you will be able to have any links into the space and defense industry to support with the nomination?
Yeah, so yeah, and that's a good question, because people come to us and they say, can you help us get a nominator? And the short answer is yes. although we can never make any guarantee, of course, because you know, we have to, what we have to do is reach out to the various organizations, and we've done this before. So we would look at professional associations, we look at research divisions of perhaps government or industry. We even may deal with, we've got government representatives we deal with and we go to for this. We can also talk to the talent team themselves. So, and also some people, just by the nature of the industry, particularly if they've got an international role, may already know people in their field in Australia. But if not, yes, we can assist you, and that would be in liaising with industry organizations, with research divisions of universities, government sectors. For example, in space and defense. Now, these areas can be a little bit more tricky because you actually normally can't work in defense normally in Australia until you become a citizen because of the security concerns, but there may still be some involvement with private industry. South Australia, outside Adelaide, has a very big defence research centre, for example. So there are organisations we can reach out and talk to about these.
Thank you. Great. Is the additional criteria mandatory for the application, James?
The additional criteria, you're talking about those 2 points I brought up about the salary and the age.
That's
so the salary, or the potential for the salary is yes. You do need to show that you've got the potential to get that salary. Even if you don't earn it now, we need to show the potential is there. And there are several cases already where, for example, in Malaysia, we've got people working in Malaysia on a much lower salary, but we can show that they have the capability of to get that higher salary in Australia. So that's the first one. The other one, which is the exceptional benefit, that only relates to people that are under 18 or 55 years plus. So if you're in that age group, then yes, we do have to show that additional criteria.
Sure. And what's the criteria for the nominator? Do they need to be well recognized internationally as well? No,
they need to have a national reputation. And that can be themselves, or it could be through extension by the company they work for if they're a senior position in that company.
Right. Thank you, James. So there's another question saying that I'm in the energy industry and I've submitted the Gti application in December 2020, but have not heard back. Does this mean I'm not successful? So,
not necessarily. As we said, when we checked a few weeks ago, they're still processing expressions of interest from July last year. So, but energy is something that I could see could be quite relevant to the COVID-19 response. I would normally think, especially if you've shown the potential to get a high salary, or got that high salary now, and you've described it well, I would think you'd get priority, personally, for the energy sector, depending on exactly what you're doing. But I would think the potential is there. You might want to look at doing a new EOI in that case, although that EOI you've done is not invalid. You might want to relook at that and look if you've described it in the best way. It is also possible to talk to the global talent team. We do that to get changes made to EOIs. So that's possible to do as well.
So it's important that the EOI has been represented correctly.
Absolutely. Yeah. The EOI actually requires a lot of documentation, a lot of information, but presented in the right way. You know, as you know, Audrey, some of the clients we deal with, they want certain things in there that they feel make them look good, but really aren't that relevant to what Australia is looking for. And this is one of the challenges, because you'll get a client and they love certain things about their work, but really it's not something that's going to be a benefit to Australia or asset to Australia or significant to Australia. So putting the right information in the right way is very, very important.
Thank you, James. There's the next question about an academic researcher. I believe this person is asking if someone who has retired as an academic researcher can be a suitable nominator.
Yeah. So yes, if they're retired but they're still involved in the field, then yes. So if they're retired but they still they could be like an emeritus professor, or they still do some involvement in that, they're still maintaining their involvement in the industry or field, then yes, it's possible. If they're just completely retired and no longer involved in the field, then no.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about, do you have any example in ICT DigiTech for this requirement, proof that they're internationally recognized with evidence of outstanding achievements?
Yeah, that's what we do. I mean, that's a basic fundamental criteria. So maybe you want some examples. I need to get examples without identifying clients. I've got 2 clients in the drone space doing things with drones that are quite interesting and innovative. I can't say what because they don't identify the client, but one of these already is involved in international events. So there is international exposure there. The other one hasn't been doing things internationally, but has had recognition internationally, and what they do can be adapted easily to other countries. And in fact, they're looking to adapt it to Australia to assist with bushfire responses in Australia. So although it hasn't been used internationally, the capability is there, and therefore it can be. So remember, for the international aspect, it doesn't have to have been done internationally yet, but if it was translated to another country, would it have the same, or would it have some level of recognition in that country, adaptability to that country?
Right. Thank you, James. There's another question that this person has completed his PhD in telecommunications engineering in December 2017, which is more than 3 years. Will he still be eligible?
Aha. So just based upon the PhD, no. Actually, it hasn't been offered in this talk. I've just said no. Here's a no. So no, if it's just based upon the degree. But if you have, so what actually has to happen then? If you've done it within 3 years, it can be based just upon your PhD, provided what you did in your PhD involved some level of international recognition, research, and the research thesis was going to be something that would be potentially beneficial to Australia. You know, I had someone not long ago that I looked at that did research into sociology, and it was how a group of men and women relate to each other in a group of 10 people. Now, I couldn't see a way that was going to be something that Australia would say, hey, this is great, this is going to be usable in Australia. In fact, it was 10 people in a specific ethnic culture that was displaced to another ethnic culture. So it's a very, very restrictive, something that just doesn't have wide adaptation and wouldn't really be beneficial to the wider community. So just because you've done PhD research doesn't make it automatically okay. But if you can demonstrate that there is, the research you've done can be used, can be adapted, can be useful, then it can be used on that. But if it's more than 3 years ago, we can still show it as a record of achievement, but it's not enough. So then we have to show that you've got achievement beyond that. So we would hope that you did your PhD more than 3 years ago, and since then you've been involved in the industry, you've done some other things, you've done some other achievements and started to build yourself up in the industry. Maybe you've come up with some further research that's significant, then yes, you can. But just based upon the degree alone, because it's more than 3 years ago, no.
We'll just go for one last question before we end the session. And for the rest of for all others, you know, if we're not able to answer your questions, some of the questions here are very specific to your eligibility. So I welcome you to send us your CV, please. Do send us your CV to the email address on the screen, and we will revert to you on your eligibility. So the last question for today would be, is there a high demand on education? Would you know how many applicants are there in the list, and if there's a waiting time for the education sector, James?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do have the information, but I just don't have it right in front of me. Okay. So no, and education was only added in January. So any stats I have are going to be minimal because it's only just recently been added to it. So short answer is no. I'll be able to check some stats, but they're not going to be much because it only has just been added.
Yeah.
So I probably wouldn't have stats around EOI approval, but possibly upon the number of EOIs submitted maybe for February.
Okay, all right, sure. So I believe we'll close the questions for today. So thank you once again, James, for giving us such a detailed session, and for everyone taking time on the Saturday to join us. Again, just to let you, I believe everyone knows that this is such a great program. We know that there are such few pathways where you'll be able to get a direct permanent residency into Australia, and GTI is one of it. So send us your CV, let us review it and come back to you. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
I did post the email in the chat forum as well, so it might be easy for people to copy.
Okay, James, that's great. All right.
With that,
Thank you.
I'll put again.
Thank you, everyone.